She wasn't supposed to notice me, yet somehow, in her light, I felt seen like never before. It was one of those quiet afternoons where the sunlight slanted through the windows at just the right angle, making the dust motes in the air look like tiny golden stars. I had come over to my friend's house to study for an upcoming exam, expecting nothing more than the usual chatter and homework. But from the moment I stepped inside, something felt different. She was there in the kitchen, her presence unassuming but impossible to ignore. My friend's mom, let's call her Elaine, moved with a kind of effortless grace that made even mundane tasks look poetic. She was in her early 40s with a quiet confidence that didn't demand attention but naturally drew it. Her hair caught the sunlight in streaks of chestnut and gold, and the faint scent of vanilla and lavender lingered in the air, subtle but intoxicating. I tried to focus on a reason I was there, but I couldn't help sneaking glances. There was something about the way she paused to set down the kettle, the slight tilt of her head when she smiled at my clumsy joke, that made my chest tighten in an unfamiliar way. It wasn't lust or anything overt. It was curiosity, admiration, and a strange kind of warmth that made my stomach flutter. And then she noticed me. Her eyes met mine for just a moment, soft and knowing, and she gave a smile that was both welcoming and slightly teasing. "You look better in my light," she said, almost as an afterthought, her voice low and warm. I froze, unsure if I'd misheard. Her words hung in the air, playful yet weighted with some unspoken meaning. My face heated, and I fumbled with my backpack as if it were the most urgent thing in the world. The moment passed quickly, but the effect lingered. Her comment wasn't flirtatious in any crude sense. It was gentle, personal, and somehow intimate. It made me hyper-aware of every detail. The soft texture of the sweater she wore, the way the sunlight pooled around her, the quiet steadiness of her posture. Even the simple act of her walking past me, her hand brushing lightly against my shoulder, sent a jolt of warmth through me. I was painfully conscious of it, yet I couldn't pull away. I didn't want to. I tried to lose myself in conversation with my friend, but Elaine's presence lingered at the edge of my awareness. Every laugh she let out, every small movement, reaching for a cup, tucking a stray strand of hair behind her ear, was magnified in my mind. I caught myself thinking about the subtle power she held, the way she seemed to exist entirely in her own rhythm, unbothered by the world, yet entirely present in that room with me. By the time I left that afternoon, I felt a strange mix of guilt and longing. Guilt for noticing her this way. After all, she was my friend's mom, but longing for the quiet warmth her presence left behind. That single comment, "You look better in my light," echoed in my mind, strange and sweet and unsettling all at once. And I realized as I walked back home that I had noticed something far more than just her beauty. I had noticed her light, and somehow I wanted to be closer to it. The days that followed my first encounter with Elaine were quietly unsettling. I tried to focus on why I was at my friend's house in the first place, studying, hanging out, but her presence lingered in my thoughts like sunlight trapped behind a window pane. I found myself noticing things I hadn't before. The way she moved through the living room, the gentle precision in her gestures, and the quiet way she seemed to occupy a space without demanding it. One afternoon, I was sitting at the kitchen table, attempting to concentrate on a particularly difficult problem in my notes. Elaine was preparing snacks nearby. She hummed softly, a tune I couldn't place, and the sound seemed to wrap around me, warming me from the inside. I looked up just as she reached for a plate, and our elbows brushed, accidentally, of course, but the contact was electric in its subtlety. The warmth of her skin against mine lingered longer than it should have, and I became painfully aware of the closeness of the space we shared in that small kitchen. She glanced at me, and for a brief moment, there was something in her eyes, curiosity, amusement, something deeper I couldn't quite name. I quickly looked away, pretending to scribble notes, but my heart had already betrayed me. Every small movement she made, the tilt of her head as she spoke to my friend, the soft sway of her hair as it fell across her shoulder, seemed magnified. I noticed the faint shimmer of sunlight in her hair, the gentle rhythm of her breathing, and even the subtle fragrance that clung to her clothes. It was all small, ordinary, yet somehow overwhelming when I was aware of it. Later, while helping her carry a tray of cups to the living room, our hands brushed again, lingering just a fraction longer than necessary. She didn't pull away, and for a moment, I felt a quiet steadiness in her presence, as if she understood the effect she had on me and didn't mind. We sat near each other on the couch, reaching for different cups, and I realized that every shared glance and accidental touch was layering an unspoken connection between us. The quiet moments became a rhythm, soft, warm, and charged with subtle tension. I found myself thinking about her when I wasn't at her house, replaying her smiles, her laughs, the way she seemed to notice even the smallest details about me. And yet, it was never overt, never inappropriate. It was the gentleness of her presence, the unexpected intimacy of shared space, that drew me in. By the time I left that day, I felt both exhilarated and guilty. Exhilarated because these small, fleeting touches made me feel seen in a way I hadn't experienced before. Guilty because I knew these feelings were growing quietly and irresistibly, and because she was my friend's mother, a line I wasn't supposed to cross. But even as I walked out the door, I knew something had shifted. Those quiet moments, the accidental brushes of skin, the lingering glances, they were no longer just coincidences. They were the beginning of something I couldn't name, something I wasn't ready to confront, but couldn't stop noticing. It started as a routine evening. I had stayed later than usual at my friend's house to help him with a project, the kind of task that demanded focus, but left plenty of quiet space for wandering thoughts. Elaine was in the living room, sorting through some papers, her presence calm and steady in the soft glow of the lamp. Something about that quiet domesticity, the way she moved with purpose yet seemed utterly at ease, made the room feel warmer, more intimate. At some point, she noticed me lingering near the doorway, my notebook in hand, but my mind elsewhere. "Come sit," she said softly, patting the couch beside her. Her invitation was casual, but the tone carried a subtle warmth that made my chest tighten. I hesitated, then settled beside her, careful to keep a polite distance. Yet every nerve in me was acutely aware of proximity. We talked about mundane things at first, school, weekend plans, mutual friends, but then, as if a quiet permission had been granted, she shared something more personal. A worry about work, a fleeting regret from the past, something vulnerable and human. Her voice was steady, but there was a fragility beneath it that made me listen more closely, hang on her words. I realized that I was not just hearing her words, but noticing the slight tension in her shoulders, the soft shift of her hands as she folded them in her lap, the way her eyes avoided mine for a moment before meeting them again. As she spoke, I instinctively reached out to adjust a stray pillow, our hands brushing briefly. The contact was accidental, yet sent a warmth through me that was impossible to ignore. She didn't pull away. Instead, she let her hand hover near mine for just a moment longer than necessary, a quiet acknowledgement of the shared space between us. I became aware of every detail, the softness of the couch beneath me, the faint scent of her perfume mingling with the aroma of the evening air, the gentle rhythm of her breathing. For a moment, words weren't needed. We simply sat there, side by side, connected in a subtle but undeniable way. Her vulnerability had created a space where I felt trusted, seen, and inexplicably closer to her than I had expected. I wanted to say something, anything, to reassure her that I was present not just physically, but emotionally. Yet I hesitated, unsure if my feelings were appropriate or wanted. When she finally laughed softly at something I said, the sound was light and melodic, and I caught myself staring a little too long. I realized I wasn't just drawn to her beauty or grace. There was something deeper, a pull toward the quiet strength that masked her fragility, the way she carried herself with both confidence and gentleness. I felt a strange mix of guilt and longing. Guilt because she was my friend's mother, and longing because I couldn't deny the quiet connection growing between us. By the end of that evening, I left with my mind buzzing. That shared secret, her willingness to be vulnerable and my silent attentiveness, had created a bridge between us. It was subtle, yet powerful, and it left me craving more of her presence, more quiet moments, more glimpses into the layers of who she really was. I realized then that this connection, unspoken but deeply felt, was the start of something that could not be ignored. After that evening, everything began to feel sharper, more vivid. Every time I visited my friend's house, Elaine's presence seemed to pull at me in ways I hadn't anticipated. It wasn't a sudden, dramatic attraction. It was quieter, subtler, like the first hints of a melody that slowly grows into something unforgettable. I found myself noticing the way she moved around her home, the way her hands gestured while she spoke, the slight arch of her brow when she was concentrating. Small details, once inconsequential, now seemed charged with significance. One afternoon, she asked me to help her carry groceries from the car. It was an ordinary task, yet it became a delicate dance of proximity and timing. As we reached for the same bag, our hands brushed. Just a fleeting contact, but I felt the warmth of her skin seep through mine, and for a moment, it was as if the air around us thickened with something unspoken. I stole a glance at her, and she met my eyes briefly, a hint of amusement playing at the corners of her lips. That small look was enough to send a strange, electric tension through my chest. Her presence had become something I noticed even when I wasn't at her house. I found myself replaying moments in my head. The softness of her voice as she asked a simple question, the casual way she leaned against the counter while stirring a pot, the way her perfume lingered long after she had passed by. It was the subtle intimacy in these gestures that drew me in, the quiet power of someone completely at ease in their own skin, someone who noticed and valued the little details of life, someone whose light seemed to touch me without effort. I began to catch myself hesitating before speaking, noticing how my own words and movements felt amplified in her presence. Every laugh, every glance, every accidental brush of hands felt laden with meaning. I realized that my emotions were no longer simply admiration or curiosity. They were evolving into something deeper, something I was only beginning to understand. At the same time, a pang of guilt shadowed each thought. She was my friend's mother, after all, and I had no right to feel this way. But the pull was undeniable. Elaine, in her quiet wisdom, seemed to sense my inner stirrings. She didn't push or tease, not overtly. Instead, she created small, intimate moments without drawing attention to them, passing me a cup of tea with a slight brush of her fingers against mine, letting her hand linger near mine while handing me a book, or simply smiling in a way that made it impossible to look away. Each gesture was subtle, almost imperceptible, but it carried a weight that made my heart race and my mind reel. By the end of the day, I understood that something fundamental had shifted. The feelings I had tried to ignore were growing louder, and every quiet moment with her seemed to amplify them. I was caught in the gentle gravity of her presence, drawn to her light, aware of the tension between us, and yet unready to confront it fully. And in that slow-burning awareness, I realized that the next step, whatever it might be, was inevitable. The emotional stir had begun, and there was no going back. By now, the quiet moments I shared with Elaine had begun to leave a lasting impression, not just on my afternoons, but on my thoughts, my emotions, and even the way I moved through my day. I couldn't ignore it any longer. My feelings for her were growing, subtle yet undeniable. But with that realization came a flood of conflict. She was my friend's mother, someone I was supposed to see as entirely off-limits, and yet my mind and heart refused to adhere to that boundary. Every time I visited, I noticed myself hesitating before speaking, aware that each word might reveal more than I intended. I caught myself staring longer than was proper, marveling at the way her hair caught the afternoon light, the softness in her smile, the rhythm of her movements. Her laughter, gentle and melodic, resonated in a way that made my chest tighten. I wanted to be near her, to share these small spaces, but I was acutely aware of the line I wasn't supposed to cross. Elaine, ever perceptive, seemed to sense my internal struggle. She didn't tease me or confront me directly, but she allowed the space for subtle closeness to exist. While passing me a book or a cup of tea, our fingers brushed just slightly, lingering longer than necessary. She leaned near me when explaining something, the warmth of her presence surrounding me. It was as if she understood the tension building inside me and didn't shy away from it, giving me permission to feel without forcing anything. These small touches became electric. My thoughts were a whirlwind. Guilt, longing, curiosity, and a quiet admiration all mingled into something intoxicating. I realized that I was drawn not just to her appearance, but to her confidence, her wisdom, the way she moved through the world with a quiet strength that contrasted sharply with my own youthful uncertainty. Every glance, every brush of hands, every shared smile carried a weight I couldn't dismiss. And yet, the more I felt, the more conflicted I became. Was it right to notice her this way? Was I betraying my friendship or crossing some invisible boundary? My mind warned me against indulging in these feelings, but my body and heart ignored every caution. It was maddening, this slow, burning desire that wasn't about anything physical inappropriately, but about the warmth of her presence, the quiet intimacy we shared, and the unspoken connection that seemed to grow stronger with every encounter. One evening, as we tidied the living room together, our shoulders brushed, and for a fleeting moment, time seemed to slow. Her hand lingered near mine, almost touching, and I felt an ache of longing that was impossible to ignore. She caught my eye, and in that glance, there was understanding, a recognition of the tension, the hesitation, the unspoken pull between us. Neither of us said anything, but that silent acknowledgement was enough to make the moment feel charged, alive, and profoundly intimate. By the time I left that night, I was more aware than ever of the delicate balance we were walking, desire tempered by respect, attraction wrapped in hesitation, and an emotional closeness that both thrilled and terrified me. The conflict within me was real, persistent, and impossible to ignore, and I realized that this slow-burn attraction had moved beyond curiosity. It was now a quiet, urgent part of me, and there was no turning back from the emotional journey that had begun. It was late evening when the house finally settled into quiet. The soft hum of the refrigerator, the faint creak of the floorboards settling, and the distant sound of traffic outside created a calm cocoon around us. I was still helping Elaine with a small task, a stack of books to organize, some papers to file, but there was a difference this time. The air between us felt charged, not with urgency, but with something heavier, warmer, and undeniably intimate. She noticed me lingering over a stack of papers, and with that familiar, gentle smile, she said, "You always seem different in my light." The words, familiar yet now imbued with subtle weight, made my chest tighten. I looked up at her, and our eyes met, soft, searching, full of unspoken understanding. There was no teasing this time, no casual playfulness. Her gaze held patience, recognition, and an acknowledgement of the tension we had both been feeling for weeks. I hesitated, words catching in my throat. It was one of those moments where everything feels suspended, the air, the room, even time itself. I wanted to confess, to explain the quiet pull I had felt toward her, the longing that had grown alongside the stolen glances and lingering touches. And slowly, haltingly, I found my voice. I can't stop noticing you," I admitted, the words almost trembling. "Not just because of how graceful you are, but because of everything you are. I can't explain it fully, but I feel drawn to you." Elaine's eyes softened. She didn't recoil, didn't judge. Instead, she shifted slightly closer, just enough that our shoulders nearly touched. There was a warmth in her presence, steady and reassuring, that calmed the storm of nerves and guilt in my chest. "I've noticed too," she whispered, her voice gentle, almost a breath. "I see you, more than anyone else seems to." For a moment, we simply sat there, side by side, letting the quiet speak between us. The room felt suspended in golden lamplight, each detail sharper, each touch more pronounced. Our hands brushed as we reached for the same stack of books. A fleeting contact, yet it carried the weight of everything unsaid. I became acutely aware of the texture of her sweater, the subtle warmth of her skin near mine, the faint scent of her perfume mingling with the night air drifting through the open window. It was a confession not born of urgency, but of recognition. Two people acknowledging a slow, simmering connection that had been building quietly over time. There was longing, yes, but also patience, respect, and mutual understanding. We didn't need words to fill every space. The glance we shared, the small brush of hands, and the warmth of our proximity said enough. That night, as I finally stood to leave, there was a subtle shift in the air, a gentle acknowledgement that things had changed. The attraction was no longer just a quiet stir in my chest. It was a shared understanding, a mutual pull we both recognized and respected. Walking home, my heart was full, tempered with the knowledge that our connection was fragile, delicate, but real. For the first time, I understood that the slow burn between us wasn't something to be rushed. It was a light to be held, a warmth to be shared carefully, and a closeness that promised more if we were patient enough to let it unfold. By now, the connection between us had settled into something both delicate and profoundly real. It wasn't a rush of passion, nor a reckless indulgence. It was a quiet, steady bond built on weeks of subtle touches, lingering glances, and unspoken understanding. Every visit to my friend's house felt different now, charged not with confusion or hesitation, but with the comfort of being seen and accepted for exactly who I was. One late afternoon, I found myself helping Elaine in the garden. The sun was dipping low, painting everything in golden hues. She handed me a small pot of flowers, and our fingers brushed as I took it. The touch lingered for a fraction longer than necessary, and for a moment, I was acutely aware of the warmth of her skin, the faint scent of her perfume, and the soft rhythm of her breathing. "You know," she said, her voice gentle and teasing, "you really do look better in my light." I smiled, and this time there was no flutter of guilt, only a quiet joy and understanding between us. We worked side by side, weeding and planting, talking about everything and nothing. Our conversation flowed easily, laughter mingling with comfortable silences. I realized that what I felt for her wasn't just attraction. It was admiration, respect, and a deep emotional intimacy that couldn't be rushed or forced. Every small gesture, her hand briefly resting on mine as she guided me, her shoulder brushing against me as we reached for the same tool, carried a warmth that was both thrilling and comforting. Later, as the sun set and the sky turned a soft shade of pink, we sat on the porch steps, our shoulders touching. She leaned slightly closer, and I felt the quiet steadiness of her presence, a heartbeat in sync with mine, reassuring and gentle. We didn't need words. The silence spoke volumes. In that shared space, there was understanding, acceptance, and an unspoken promise that our connection, though unconventional, was real, mutual, and meaningful. She smiled at me, her eyes reflecting the fading light, and for a moment, I felt completely seen. I realized that the slow burn that had started weeks ago, the accidental touches, the shared confidences, the subtle tension, had grown into something tender and lasting. It wasn't about crossing boundaries or indulging in fleeting desire. It was about presence, patience, and emotional closeness. As I walked home that evening, the memory of her warmth stayed with me. The brush of her hand, the gentle tone of her voice, the quiet understanding in her eyes. The story had reached its conclusion, not with a dramatic confession or overt romantic gesture, but with a sense of deep satisfaction and completeness. I knew that our connection would continue to grow, patiently, respectfully, and beautifully, shaped by shared moments, quiet understanding, and the steady glow of her light. It was a slow burn that had found its resolution, leaving a warmth that lingered long after I had left. And in that warmth, I realized something simple and powerful. Sometimes the most meaningful love isn't loud or immediate. It's quiet, patient, and quietly brilliant, lighting the heart in ways nothing else can.